Everything you think you know about failure is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human potential. The most dangerous idea in modern society isn't that we might fail. It's that we've come to see failure as something to be avoided at all costs. This collective fear of losing has created a pandemic of mediocrity, where people would rather stay safely within their limits than risk the transformative power of defeat. Your fear of failure isn't protecting you. It's slowly killing your potential for greatness. The most successful people in history aren't those who failed the least. They're the ones who failed the most but knew how to transform those failures into stepping stones. Yet we've created a society that celebrates the end result while hiding the messy process of getting there. We share the victory photos, but hide the tears, the doubts, the moments of complete despair that actually laid the foundation for success. This selective storytelling has created a devastating disconnect between what we expect from our journey and what it actually takes to achieve meaningful growth. The room falls silent as the empty trophy case catches the morning light. We've all stood there, staring at the space where our dreams were supposed to sit. That moment when everything you work for slips through your fingers like sand, leaving nothing but the hollow echo of what could have been. It's a universal truth that none of us wants to face. Sometimes our greatest teachers are our most painful losses. You're nodding because you know exactly what I mean. That promotion you were certain was yours, the relationship you thought would last forever, the business venture you poured your heart and soul into, the competition you trained months for. We've all tasted the bitter medicine of defeat, haven't we? But here's what fascinates me. Why do some people crumble under the weight of loss, while others emerge stronger, more resilient, and ultimately more successful? What's the invisible force that transforms defeat into the seeds of victory? Take a moment and think about your most recent disappointment. Really feel it. Let yourself go back to that moment when reality didn't match your expectations. Notice how your body responds to even the memory of it. That tightness in your chest, the slight drop in your shoulders. These are the echoes of loss that live within it. Now, what if I told you that this very feeling, this uncomfortable, sometimes painful sensation, is actually the universe's most powerful gift to you? What if every single defeat you've experienced was actually setting you up for something far greater than what you initially wanted? I know it sounds counterintuitive. After all, we live in a world obsessed with winning. From our earliest days, we're taught that success means never failing, never losing, never showing weakness. Our social media feeds are carefully curated highlight reels of victories, achievements, and perfectly captured moments of triumph. But this obsession with winning has created a dangerous illusion. The belief that loss is something to be avoided at all costs, rather than embraced as the master teacher it truly is. Let me share something with you that changed my entire perspective on losing. During my darkest moment of defeat, I discovered a truth that would forever transform how I viewed failure. It wasn't in a book or a seminar it was in watching a young child learn to walk. Have you ever really paid attention to this miraculous process? This tiny human with absolutely no instruction manual, no formal training, and no fear of failure attempts one of the most challenging physical feats they'll ever accomplish. And here's the beautiful part. They fail hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. They fall. They bump their heads. They cry. What do they do next? They get back up every single time. Why? Because they haven't yet learned that falling is something to be afraid of. They haven't been conditioned to see failure as something shameful or disappointing. To them, each fall is simply information, valuable data about what doesn't work, which brings them one step closer to discovering what does. When did we lose this innate wisdom? At what point did we start seeing defeat as something to avoid, rather than a necessary step in our growth? The answer lies in our understanding of what losing really means. You see, losing isn't the opposite of winning. It's the prerequisite for it. Every major breakthrough in human history came after countless setbacks. Every great innovation emerged from a graveyard of failed attempts. Every meaningful personal transformation was born from the ashes of what didn't work. Think about your own life for a moment. What were your most significant moments of growth? When did you learn the most about yourself? I'd be willing to bet it wasn't during your victories. It was in the quiet aftermath of defeat, when you are forced to confront your limitations, question your assumptions, and find strength you didn't know you possessed. This is where real transformation begins. Not in the comfortable space of success, but in the challenging terrain of defeat. It's in these moments that we discover our true capacity for resilience, innovation, and growth. But here's the crucial point. It's not the loss itself that teaches us. It's our relationship with it. How we choose to interpret and respond to defeat determines whether it becomes a stepping stone or a stumbling block. Have you ever noticed how some of the most successful people you know seem to have an almost peculiar relationship with failure? They don't just accept it. They almost seem to welcome it. They understand something that most people miss, that comfort is the enemy of growth, and that staying in your safe zone is the surest path to stagnation. These individuals have mastered what I call the loss lens, the ability to see defeat not as an endpoint, but as a data point. They've learned to ask different questions when faced with failure. Instead of, why did this happen to me? They ask, what is this teaching me? Instead, how could I have avoided this? They ask, how can I use this? This shift in perspective changes everything. It transforms loss from something that happens to you into something that happens for you. It turns defeat from a period into a comma, from a wall into a door. But I can hear what some of you are thinking right now. That's easy to say when the stakes are low. But what about when everything is on the line? What about when the loss feels too big to bear? These are valid questions, and they bring us to one of the most important aspects of understanding loss. As a teacher, the size of the loss doesn't change its fundamental nature as a learning opportunity. It only amplifies the potential for growth. In fact, the bigger the loss, the more profound the potential lesson. Think about it. When everything is stripped away, when all our carefully constructed plans crumble, we're forced to confront our true selves. We discover what we're really made of, what truly matters to us, and what we're capable of enduring. This is where real character is forged. Not in the easy victories or the smooth sailing, but in the storms that threaten to sink us. It's in these moments that we develop the kind of resilience that can't be taught in any classroom or read about in any book. But here's the beautiful paradox. The more we embrace loss as a teacher, the less power it has to devastate us. When we understand that defeat is not the end of the story, but merely a plot twist in our larger narrative, we develop a kind of emotional immunity to its sting. This doesn't mean we don't feel the pain of loss. Of course we do, we're human. But we begin to see that pain differently. Instead of viewing it as something to avoid at all costs, we recognize it as the sensation of growth, of boundaries being pushed, of comfort zones being expanded. Think of it like physical exercise. When you're building muscle, the discomfort you feel isn't a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that something's working. The same principle applies to emotional and psychological growth. The discomfort of loss is often a signal that we're expanding beyond our current limitations. But this understanding alone isn't enough. We need practical strategies for transforming loss into learning. We need tools that help us navigate the challenging terrain of defeat without losing our way. First and foremost, we need to develop what I call emotional literacy, the ability to read our responses to loss accurately. This means learning to distinguish between the initial sting of defeat and the stories we tell ourselves about what that defeat means. When you experience a loss, take a moment to separate the facts from your interpretation of those facts. A fact might be that you didn't get the job you wanted, but the interpretation that you're not good enough, that you'll never succeed, or that you're destined for failure. Those are stories, not facts. This distinction is crucial because while we can't always control the facts of our losses, we have complete control over the stories we tell ourselves about them. And it's these stories that ultimately determine whether a loss becomes a lesson or a limitation. How many times have you looked back on a loss that seemed devastating at the time, only to realize later that it was actually a blessing in disguise? How often has a closed door led you to an open window you wouldn't have otherwise noticed? This isn't just positive thinking or wishful retrospection. It's a pattern that plays out consistently in human experience. The job you didn't get leads to an unexpected opportunity that better aligns with your true purpose. The relationship that ended creates space for deeper self-discovery and eventually a more authentic connection. The business that failed teaches you invaluable lessons that fuel your next more successful venture. But here's the key: you don't have to wait for time to pass to gain these insights. You can learn to see the opportunity in the obstacle while you're still in the midst of it. This is what separates those who are broken by defeat from those who are broken open by it. Think about a seed for a moment. For it to grow into something new, it must first break apart. The protective shell that once served it must split open for new life to emerge. Our losses often serve the same function. They break open the shell of our current limitations, allowing something new to grow. But how do we maintain this perspective when we're in the thick of disappointment? How do we access this wisdom when everything feels like it's falling apart? The answer lies in understanding the 3 fundamental truths about loss that most people never grasp. The first truth is that loss is never just about what we think we're losing. When we dig deeper, we often discover that our attachment to the outcome was masking a deeper need or desire. The promotion wasn't just about the title or the money. It was about feeling validated, respected, or secure. The relationship wasn't just about that particular person. It was about feeling loved, understood, or worthy. Understanding this truth helps us separate the specific loss from the underlying need. Once we make this distinction, we can explore other ways to meet that need, often discovering paths we wouldn't have considered otherwise. This is why so many people look back on their losses as pivotal moments of redirection. The universe's way of pointing them toward what they really needed, not just what they thought they wanted. The second truth is that our greatest losses often protect us from even greater ones. How many times have you heard someone say, "I thought losing that job was the worst thing that could happen to me until I discovered the company went bankrupt 6 months later." Or if that relationship had worked out, I would have missed meeting the person who truly changed my life. These aren't just lucky coincidences or random twists of fate. They're examples of how loss often serves as a protective mechanism, steering us away from paths that wouldn't have served our highest good. But here's the catch. We usually can't see this protection while we're experiencing the loss. It requires trust, faith, and a willingness to believe that something better awaits us on the other side of disappointment. The third truth, and perhaps the most powerful, is that loss is often the universe's way of creating space for something new. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the same principle applies to our lives. When something is taken away, it creates an opening for something else to enter. The question is, are we too busy mourning what we've lost to notice what's trying to emerge? Think about the last major loss you experienced. In the aftermath, did you notice any unexpected opportunities, connections, or insights that showed up? Did you discover strengths you didn't know you had? Did you form bonds with people you might not have otherwise met? These aren't coincidences. They're examples of how loss creates space for growth. But here's where most people get stuck. They understand these truths intellectually, but they struggle to apply them in the heat of the moment when emotions are running high and the pain of loss is fresh. How do we access this deeper wisdom? The answer lies in developing what I call loss resilience. The ability to bounce back from defeat, not just stronger, but wiser. This isn't something we're born with. It's a skill we can cultivate through conscious practice. The first step in building loss resilience is to change our relationship with discomfort. Most of us have been conditioned to avoid discomfort at all costs. We see it as something negative, something to be eliminated as quickly as possible. But what if we started seeing discomfort as a signal of growth? What if we learn to welcome it as a sign that we're pushing beyond our current limitations? Think about it this way. Every significant achievement in your life probably involves some degree of discomfort. Learning to walk, ride a bike, swim, or master a new skill. All of these experiences involve falling, failing, and feeling uncomfortable. But you persisted because the desire to grow was stronger than the desire to stay comfortable. The same principle applies to emotional discomfort. When we learn to sit with the discomfort of loss without immediately trying to fix it or escape from it, we develop a kind of emotional stamina that serves us in every area of life. This brings us to the second key aspect of loss resilience, the ability to maintain perspective in the midst of difficulty. This doesn't mean denying our feelings or pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It means being able to hold two truths simultaneously. Yes, this hurts right now. And think of perspective like a camera lens. When you're too close to something, it's hard to see it clearly. You need to zoom out to get the full picture. The same is true with loss. When we're in the middle of it, it can feel all-consuming, like this feeling will last forever. But if we can zoom out and view our current situation as just one chapter in our larger life story, we begin to see it differently. One powerful way to maintain perspective is to ask yourself, what would my future self think about this situation? 5 years from now, looking back on this moment, what wisdom might you have gained? What might you understand then that you can't see now? This isn't about bypassing your current feelings or rushing to find the silver lining. It's about recognizing that your present perspective is limited and that time often reveals meanings and purposes we couldn't have imagined in the moment. The third element of loss resilience is what I call creative response, the ability to use loss as a catalyst for innovation and growth. This is where the real magic happens. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? We ask, how can I use this? Every loss creates an opportunity for reinvention. When one door closes, we're forced to look for other doors, or better yet, to build our own. This is how innovations are born, how new paths are forged, how breakthroughs happen. Think about some of the most successful businesses in the world. Many of them were born from loss or failure. The founder lost their job and was forced to reinvent themselves. A product failed in its intended market but found unexpected success in a different application. A setback forced a complete rethinking of the business model, leading to a more innovative approach. The same principle applies to personal growth. Every loss invites us to reinvent ourselves, to question our assumptions, to imagine new possibilities. But this only happens if we're willing to see loss as an opportunity rather than just an ending. This brings us to a crucial point about loss that often gets overlooked: the importance of community. We often think we need to process our losses alone, that showing vulnerability or asking for support somehow diminishes us. But the opposite is true. Sharing our losses with others not only helps us heal, it creates connections that enrich our lives in unexpected ways. Think about the deepest relationships in your life. Chances are, many of them were forged or strengthened during times of difficulty. There's something about shared struggle that creates bonds stronger than any success could build. But there's more to it than just emotional support. When we share our losses with others, we gain access to different perspectives, different experiences, different ways of seeing our situation. Sometimes the breakthrough we need comes not from our own thinking, but from someone else's insight or experience. This is why isolation during times of loss can be so dangerous. When we withdraw into ourselves, we cut off access to the very resources and perspectives that could help us transform our loss into learning. We need others, not just for comfort, but for growth. Yet many of us resist this truth. We've been conditioned to see asking for help as a sign of weakness, to believe that we should be able to handle everything on our own. But this is another illusion that loss helps shatter. No one achieves anything meaningful entirely on their own. Every success story is also a story of support, guidance, and connection. This brings us to one of the most powerful truths about loss: its ability to strip away the non-essential and reveal what truly matters. In our most challenging moments, when everything we thought we needed is taken away, we discover what we actually can't live without. Have you ever noticed how crisis has a way of clarifying priorities? How the things that seemed so important yesterday suddenly become trivial in the face of real loss. This isn't a coincidence. It's one of loss's most valuable gifts to us. It shows us the difference between what we want and what we need, between what we think matters and what actually does. Think about the times in your life when you faced significant loss. What did those experiences reveal about your true priorities? What became crystal clear in those moments that you might have otherwise missed? Many people discover that the things they were chasing, the bigger house, the more prestigious title, the external markers of success, weren't actually the source of fulfillment they imagined them to be. Loss has a way of cutting through our illusions and bringing us face to face with what truly matters. But here's where it gets interesting. This clarity, this stripping away of the non-essential, often leads to a kind of freedom that we couldn't have accessed any other way. When we lose what we thought we needed to be happy, we sometimes discover that happiness was available to us all along in much simpler, more authentic ways. This is the paradox of loss. In taking away what we think we need, it often gives us what we actually need. In stripping away our carefully constructed facades, it reveals our authentic selves. In breaking down our plans, it opens us up to possibilities we couldn't have imagined. But to access this wisdom, we need to be willing to sit in the discomfort of uncertainty. This is perhaps the hardest part of dealing with loss. The not knowing what comes next, not knowing how long the pain will last, not knowing if we'll ever feel whole again. Our natural tendency is to try to escape this uncertainty as quickly as possible. We rush to fill the void, to make new plans, to find quick solutions. But what if the uncertainty itself is part of the gift? What if the not knowing is actually creating space for something new to emerge? Think about the process of transformation in nature. A caterpillar entering its chrysalis doesn't know it's going to become a butterfly. It enters a state of complete dissolution, where its former self literally breaks down into a cellular soup before reorganizing into something entirely new. If the caterpillar could think, it would probably be terrified. But this process of breaking down is essential. The same is true for us. Sometimes we need to allow ourselves to be in that space of not knowing, that uncomfortable void between what was and what will be. This requires tremendous courage. The courage to stay present, even when everything in us wants to run away or numb the pain. But here's what most people miss about courage. It's not about being fearless. It's about feeling the fear and moving forward anyway. It's about acknowledging the uncertainty and still taking the next step. It's about being willing to be vulnerable enough to learn from our losses instead of hiding from them. This brings us to another crucial aspect of loss that often goes unrecognized: its role in developing emotional intelligence. Every time we face a loss and choose to stay present with our feelings instead of running from them, we become more able to handle future challenges, more equipped to support others through their difficulties, more skilled at navigating the complex terrain of human experience. Think about the people in your life who have the greatest emotional wisdom. Chances are they've faced significant losses and learned from them. They've developed what I call emotional literacy, the ability to read and respond to both their own emotions and those of others with understanding and compassion. This kind of emotional intelligence isn't something we're born with. It's something we develop through experience, particularly through how we handle our losses and disappointments. Each time we choose to face our feelings instead of avoiding them, we grow. Each time we allow ourselves to be vulnerable instead of putting up walls, we become more resilient. But this brings us to a critical question. How do we know when to keep pushing through loss and when to accept it and move on? This is one of the most challenging aspects of dealing with defeat, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. The key lies in developing what I call intuitive wisdom, the ability to distinguish between the kind of resistance that's telling us to keep going and the kind that's telling us to change direction. This isn't something that can be reduced to a simple formula or decision tree. It requires us to develop a deeper relationship with ourselves and our inner knowing. Think about times in your life when you knew deep down that it was time to let go of something, a relationship, a job, a dream, even though on the surface you could have kept trying. What was it that told you it was time? How did that inner knowing feel different from the voice of fear or the desire to quit when things got tough? Developing this kind of intuitive wisdom requires us to quiet the external noise and listen to our inner guidance. It means learning to distinguish between the voice of fear, which tells us to quit at the first sign of difficulty, and the voice of wisdom, which knows when it's time to redirect our energy elsewhere. This is where the practice of mindful reflection becomes invaluable. Taking time to sit quietly with our experiences, to process our losses without judgment, to listen to the subtle guidance that often gets drowned out by the noise of daily life. These practices help us develop the discernment we need to navigate loss wisely. But mindful reflection isn't just about sitting quietly. It's about asking ourselves better questions. Instead of why did this happen to me, we might ask, what is this teaching me? Instead of how can I avoid ever feeling this way again, we might ask, how is this feeling helping me grow? These questions shift our focus from victim to student, from passive recipient of circumstance to active participant in our own growth. They help us move from a place of helplessness to a place of empowerment. And this brings us to one of the most transformative aspects of loss: its ability to awaken us to our own power, not the kind of power that comes from controlling circumstances or avoiding defeat, but the deeper power that comes from knowing we can handle whatever life throws at us. Think about it. Every time you've survived a loss, every time you've bounced back from defeat, every time you found a way to keep going when you thought you couldn't, you've proven to yourself that you're stronger than you thought. This kind of strength can't be given to us. It can only be earned through experience. But here's the beautiful thing about this kind of strength. Once you develop it, no one can take it away from you. Unlike external achievements or possessions, the internal resources you develop through facing and learning from loss become permanent parts of who you are.